I'm delighted to announce today that we have a new co-director of the Mainstreaming Scaling Working Group who will be chairing today's session, and it is my pleasure to introduce Carla Peterson. Carla currently serves as the Scaling Director of Innovations for Poverty Action, which, as many of you know, is one of the leading organizations in generating evidence for impact and effectiveness in international development, and then using that evidence to drive scaling and increase their reach and impact. Prior to her working at IPA, Innovations for Poverty Action, she was a senior evidence to scale manager at JPAL, where she worked on scaling evidence-based programs and has an extensive background in international development, particularly working on evidence-based programs in Mexico. She's currently based in Paris, so we're all jealous of her. And without further ado, I will turn it over to her to introduce and lead this great program we have for you today on with Catholic Relief Services experience in mainstreaming scaling into their work. Over to you, Carla. Thank you so much, and really a big welcome from all of us here at the SCOP. We're really delighted to have you on part of the team.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm really excited to have joined the working group and very excited to have the opportunity to share this webinar today. So a little bit of context for those of you who might be joining one of our webinars for the first time. The Scaling Community of Practice is a platform of experts that focuses on the production and the exchange of knowledge on different approaches to scaling up development interventions. And for the last 2 years, the Scaling Community of Practice has been working on an initiative to study a little bit more how funding organizations are integrating scaling up. And so far, this mainstreaming initiative has developed 13 case studies, and we're hoping to have a total of 25 by the end of this year. And we have also published a report synthesizing our lessons, which is available online, and I'll be sharing all of these resources via chat with you today. And the case of Catholic Relief Services that we are gathered to listen to today is one of these 13 case studies developed by the initiative. And to share the findings from the study, I am delighted to be joined today by Lan Mercado, Director of Cascade, a project of Catholic Relief Services to catalyze outcomes at scale, Erin Baldridge, CRS Deputy Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, and Sanila Imamovic, a CRS Country Representative for Bosnia-Herzegovina and the Balkans. And following our speakers' presentations, we will have 20 minutes for Q&A. So please add your questions to the chat and I will moderate. So without further ado, I will now pass the floor to Lan to present the findings of this very interesting case study. Lan, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Carla, and also thank you, Richard, for opening the panel. Very warm greetings to everyone who joined us today. I'm very pleased to be opening the CRS panel presentation, noting that while I have only been with CRS for 6 months in my role as Director for Cascade, which stands for Catalyzing Scale Through Evidence, I'm actually standing on the shoulders of Erin Baldridge and Sanela Imamovic, our 2 speakers today, who have done amazing work on the process of scaling outcomes in CRS. As you can see on this slide, CRS uses the tagline Catalyzing Humanitarian and Development Outcomes at Scale, and our 2 speakers will be elaborating on this. But before I hand over to our speakers, I want to highlight CRS's current strategy called Vision 2030 in their own hands. The strategy references the long history of CRS's work to address poverty, injustice, and violence, and why, given current challenges, CRS sees the need to be bolder and more ambitious in affecting transformational change. The 2030 strategy has 4 interlinked strategic approaches. The first is the shift to being a catalyst and recognizing that this means breaking out of traditional paradigms. The strategy also created 6 strategic change platforms that focus our efforts to catalyze scaled outcomes. The same strategy is the one that spurred the creation of Cascade, the team that Erin used to lead and now I am leading. I also want to go to this next slide, and as you'll be hearing from my colleagues Erin and Sanela, Cascade started the task of supporting CRS to become a catalyst for scale, first by learning from our experiences of scale. 53 CRS case studies from across geographies, sectors, and working with a variety of actors were collected, analyzed, and curated. Insights and trends were distilled from these into learning that we triangulated with field experiences of colleagues. We convened many stakeholders across CRS to define how CRS engages in scale and have come up with this definition of what it means to be a catalyst. And this is about collaborating with others, convening and accompanying a variety of stakeholders within systems to support local actors to achieve humanitarian and development outcomes that are equitable, inclusive, and at the scale that is appropriate for the problem. As you might note, this definition is different from the more usual definition that's premised on innovation and then scaled. This definition's emphasis is on systems, local actors, and scale that's relative to the size of the problem. We're still on this journey, and while we have learned a lot, we continue to build on that learning. So at this point, let me introduce our two members of the panel. Erin Baldridge is currently the Deputy Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. But before that, as I mentioned, she was the Cascade Director who did all the groundbreaking work. Erin will share agency-wide initiatives and investments to translate Vision 2030 into action, but also share challenges and lessons we've learned so far. Sanela is the country representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina and was one of the pioneers of CRS's approach to catalyzing scale. Sanela will share her own experience, a country perspective on catalyzing scale, including her personal transformation. So over to you, Erin.
Thank you for that great introduction, Lan. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate the investment that we've received from a foundation called GHR. This foundation has invested in CRS for several years with what they call a legacy grant. And the intention of this legacy grant has been to support CRS's own institutional capacity. So CRS chose to focus on our institutional capacity to catalyze transformational change at scale in support of our Vision 2030 strategy. And this has been building on the investment that GHR has made in CRS over the past several years. As you can see on this slide, we started with the opportunity to strengthen our capacity in emergency response. So many know us as an emergency response organization. That's really where we thrive. We are able to hit the ground running very quickly to meet those urgent needs. And then the second grant that they provided, once we had strengthened that emergency response capacity, was to strengthen our capacity as an organization to then strengthen the capacity of other organizations on the ground who are closer to the problem and who are able to provide their response that is more appropriate to the problem based on their local understanding of it. So strengthening local partners, and that includes civil society partners, it includes government, it includes the private sector and how they respond to the needs of the people on the ground. And then building from that, we saw, okay, we've had the opportunity to meet urgent needs when that arises. We've strengthened coalitions of local partners, and we see that our role, rather than being the hands-on doer at all times, can be one of catalyzing the outcomes, the results, the impact that others can achieve within their communities. And they are present at a larger scale. They're present at the scale of the problem, and they're able to provide responses that are at the scale of the problem. So I'm going to take a step back and say that even though these three images appear to be of three very different things. One, emergency response, really literally construction. Two, strengthening partners' capacity. And then three, looking at that large scale impact that can be had nationally. These all come from one trajectory in one country where CRS did all of these different things and earned the opportunity through those relationships, through the reputation of having that hands-on doer experience. We earned the opportunity, the relationships, to be able to play a role as a catalyst for the actions that others can take, that other investors can make, to be able to have impact that is much closer to the scale of the need than what our individual projects could do. And actually these pictures that you see, these are the stories that Sanella is going to be telling us about, and the experience that they had earning that opportunity to play a catalytic role, and how did they have to shift the way they were working as a country program, as an organization. What are the mindsets they had to change within our own teams to be able to play that catalytic role? So when we were tasked as a team, the Cascade team, who was given this great opportunity to strengthen CRS's institutional capacity for scale, some of the ideas were, perhaps we need to put out guidance, perhaps we need to give criteria and things like that. But we thought, no, there's a lot of literature about scale. There is a whole lot of scaling science out there. Research, commercial. We thought we've got also a lot of experience within CRS across so many different country programs, over 100 country programs where we work, multiple regions, different sectors. So we started first by learning. What have we been doing in these different countries to try to work towards impact at scale that's larger than our projects, than individual projects that we work on? We collected case studies, which you see this dashboard here of all the case studies we collected. We talked to peer organizations. We learned through our strategic change platforms that CRS is invested in, and convened all of this experience to try to distill what are some of the key insights and what do we understand to be the particular strengths of CRS and how we engage as a catalyst for scale. This may or may not apply to other organizations because this is truly based on the way we work in other countries and the experience, the reputation, and the relationships that we bring to bear, which is really varied in different countries. So this qualitative analysis of the case studies allowed us to learn some lessons, and the experience of those strategic change platforms that we're working with also allowed us to distill some experiences. So I just wanted to start with that perspective that we started first from an understanding of what have we been doing and what can we learn from our practitioners on the ground and our partners who've been working with us for so long. So what did we learn? The learning from the case studies, and this is a very high-level summary. There's so much that we can learn from these case studies, but I'm just going to present what we have time for today. Evidence as something that is absolutely necessary and completely insufficient. So evidence, when we first started with this initiative, we had a lot of assumptions about the role of evidence, and that evidence was absolutely one of the critical elements. We did find that it is critical, it is necessary, and that it's insufficient. Evidence gets you a seat at the table, it opens the door, it allows you to have the credibility you need when you're discussing options and possibilities with other experts in a country or in a region who are really aware of these situations and know the evidence that exists. Bringing further evidence really helps to make those arguments, but it's just a starting point, and it's just one element. So what else are some of the elements that we found to be important? The importance of convening and accompaniment, the ability to collaborate for collective action. These are things that came out so strongly in the case studies and something that we weren't necessarily fully expecting. It's really a clear lesson. We continue to see it with the strategic change platforms and the way that they are working, that our ability to be one of many, our ability to not need to be the protagonist, of the work that we're trying to contribute to is really quite important when we talk about our role as a catalyst for scale, and not an organization that is achieving directly, but trying to catalyze those who can at the scale of the need. So that accompanying, convening, collaboration were key themes that we learned about. We also had this assumption that an innovation. Often when you hear about scale, one of the first words you hear, at least up until a few years ago, we were constantly reading about innovation as a core element for scale, a necessity when you're doing anything to try to scale up. Well, we found that an innovation is not a prerequisite. However, an understanding of systems absolutely is. So that solar system there is trying to represent that systems are a critical element, something that absolutely must be understood in order to effectively engage in change that has an impact at the scale that is closer to the need. We also found very clearly throughout these case studies, throughout our experiences with these platforms, that constant learning and adaptation is required. When you're working within these complex systems, trying to work collaboratively towards a change that's going to be both sustainable and at the scale of the problem, you have to adapt to constant change. You have to be engaged with a variety of stakeholders because they can change, their priorities can change, and you can't just be reliant on one to help move something forward. So those coalitions, those relationships, and the ability to change and adapt and work towards that ultimate vision flexibly is critical. Specifically from the strategic change platforms, those 6 platforms that our agency has invested in through our agency strategy, we've learned a few consistent lessons. That understanding the systems takes a lot of time. That's kind of an obvious one. We all know scale takes time, and scaling in a way that is sustainable and impactful really takes an understanding of those systems, which really takes a while. So you've got to plan for that within your long-term initiatives. Also, that we need to take advantage of projects as building blocks towards that larger strategy. So if we have a long-term vision for an impact that we want to contribute to at scale, how do we take the opportunities of those individually funded projects that we have to make incremental progress, to be able to slowly but steadily be focused on what's it going to take, what incremental changes can we get to through those projects? And getting the right teams. That has been absolutely a lesson over time. People who understand the systems are able to engage collaboratively with other actors. You know, sometimes the types of skills that we prioritize for project management, being able to manage to a timeline, being able to say, okay, follow these directions and let's get to the indicators, those may not be the same skills that are going to be appropriate for a scale initiative where you're really trying to work adaptively, flexibly, and in a very collaborative way, not dictating the way, but finding the way with others. We also recognize the critical importance of having engaged leadership. That means, you know, within CRS, we have a very decentralized organization. We work in so many different countries. We have regional offices. We have teams at headquarters that support us. And we need that engagement and understanding of what we're trying to collectively achieve across that leadership spectrum. And when they're engaged and supportive, and that consistently remains across different changes in personnel, that can really help us as well. So these are some of the critical lessons we learned. We also distilled some of these lessons into a conversation starter. It's a one-page, really simple visual document that we've shared across our organization to recognize that we can't just start with, here's the way we're going to work. We have to think about how are we working now as a project-based organization that works towards timelines, budget, getting things done for our indicators. How do we shift our mindsets now to being more of an organization that's a catalyst? So this mindset shift conversation starter was intended to help describe what we mean by these shifts. what are we seeing within those experiences that help us understand how we can move from the type of organization that we are comfortable being, that project-based organization, to being enablers, having the capabilities to support others towards the impact that they're seeking at scale and contribute to that, rather than trying to lead towards the activities that we have scheduled. So we focused on mindset shifts at all levels of the organization, and this is something we'll continue to focus on for years. I'm sure that this is something that is a challenge for all of you as you work towards being catalysts for scale, or if you are donors that are contributing to impact at scale, you recognize that within your own institutions, there are mindsets, there are processes that make it really difficult for us to work differently. And we're gradually understanding what those are and trying to work towards improving as we go. One of the ways that we made this a bit more concrete, so that conversation starter helps people to open up about, okay, this is the way I'm used to working, and these are the ways that I would need to shift to be more catalytic. We've also built this into we have core capabilities. We have capabilities that we work on across the spectrum of different leadership levels in our organization. And these inform different trainings. They inform the way that we hire, the things that people work on to strengthen their own abilities to work in the job that they're in and to earn the opportunity to move into the next role. So we've updated what was called our influence and representation capability to be something that moves away from just being able to be an ambassador of CRS and demonstrating the impact of CRS and being able to represent CRS's impact that we're having through our projects, to now moving into a role of understanding what is our fit in this larger system. How do we understand what other actors are doing, listen to what they need and what they are working on so that we can best influence towards the types of impacts that we hope to contribute to? So these are some of the capabilities that we've worked on building into our entire organization and the various levels of leadership, from people who are working directly in the field with our partners to those who are working in advisory levels. And you can see what that looks like on the screen here without me reading through it. It was also important that the organization, that CRS, invested in strategic change platforms. This was an intentional approach to look at how do we take a step back from our project-based identity and look at how would we be able to set some very ambitious, high-level objectives for impact in 6 different areas where we have reputation, strength, relationships, and be able to encourage our colleagues around the world to work differently and work towards that longer term vision as they are working in the projects that relate to that sector or to that particular change that we're trying to affect. The support that colleagues around the world are able to get for the work that they're currently doing on these 6 different areas has been key, and particularly the intentionality. The ability to pause and say, okay, we're working towards these project outcomes, which are very important. And all of this should be leading towards something larger. How are we building those relationships in country? How are we moving towards impact that will be at a larger scale? So those strategic change platforms and that investment, the intentional focus on those has been really important. And we've been able to already see some huge impact from those. Another thing that has helped us is to work specifically on having scale principles. We don't think that we can have ever a step-by-step guide, because what we're talking about is something so complex. It depends on the situation, depends on what you're trying to work towards. So there would be no way to be able to say, here's how to do it. If anyone hasn't found that, that'd be great to know, but I would be skeptical. I mean, we determined, we worked with an organization called Utilization Focused Evaluation. You may have heard of Michael Quinn Patton. He's quite famous in evaluation. and his daughter Charmaine supported us. They interviewed a lot of different colleagues around the world who are actively working on these scale initiatives and asked them, what are some of the challenges that you have when you're working on scale? What are some of the difficult decisions you're faced with, or the kind of what do you have to balance when you're trying to work on scale? And so we came up with these principles that guide our teams as they're working towards a catalyzing impact that's achieved by others at a scale that's really greater than what we could achieve on our own. There are various versions of this. You know, we've worked through it with many different colleagues and teams. And the great thing is that we've found that it's able to be adapted by different teams for their particular needs. We're not trying to dictate that these be used in any particular way, which I think has really been a helpful way to go, because we recognize that variety in the way that people work. We've had certainly a number of challenges. These are challenges I'm sure many of you can relate to. The time, the ability to really focus on this kind of long-term vision versus the daily requirements. That's always a challenge that we're going to face. You know, staff are overstretched. They don't always have time to learn a new methodology or operationalize a new framework. It makes it, you know, a challenge to get people's attention. And these days we're all trying to struggle for, you know, the ability to have people focus on whatever is the priority at hand. But as our colleagues are starting to see how what they are doing today in the project can contribute to that larger vision, there's a lot more continuity, and it doesn't feel like something separate and new. It feels like, okay, I'm on my way. I can contribute to this. Today, what I'm doing may not be all the way towards the catalytic role that I would love to be able to play, but I'm working towards it little by little on the project that I'm working on today. And then designing a system for adaptive management, for meal, that has been sometimes a challenge. You know, we find that when you're working on a scale initiative, you don't necessarily have direct control over those who would be providing data that would help you to get a sense of the progress that you're making. We could go and have an entire webinar on the challenges related to adaptive management, particularly adaptive management as it relates to the type of information that we would need to gather to know how to better manage adaptively in that context, rather than collecting indicators of just progress, which we do through our typical projects. Also, since CRS, as I had mentioned before, is a large decentralized organization, you know, sometimes agency-wide shifts are challenging. And one of the opportunities, though, is that we place really high value on field-driven solutions. And since this, as I had mentioned earlier, we really started by looking at what is happening in countries where we work. What have we had success doing? Where have we failed and why? And having that learning come through the country programs into a team that is analyzing it with them and asking them, is this what you're experiencing? Is this what makes sense to you? That has really helped for us to all feel together like we're working towards change at the same time, rather than having it be sort of dictated from the top down as it could be for some initiatives. Also, that geographic and technical diversity of CRS makes it really important for us to be able to meet the regions and the countries where they are. Right now, I work in Latin America. Every country has a very different context, and it wouldn't make sense for us to hear from headquarters, this is the way you need to do it. So we recognize that diversity is important in understanding how does it apply to this particular context, and how can we make sure that we have impact. We're also a project-based organization. I described how that kind of seeps into not just our mindset, but our processes, our policies. There's a lot that would need to shift there to be able to be open to working in a new and different way. And so that's something that we're constantly working on. And we have, again, the opportunity to hear from those who are working on this in countries, in regions, who are able to say, look, these policies that we have are very good for these reasons, and they're really slowing us down in our ability to collaborate with these types of partners. How can we work together to make a shift that would allow us to both be compliant the way we need to be, and be a little more open-minded about how we engage in certain types of partnerships, for example? And then influencing donor thinking. that's what we're here for today. This whole group is focused on mainstreaming scale into donor organizations, because even if CRS, even if other organizations change the way that we individually work, if the donor guidelines require these types of projects to be implemented in this way, that is more of a, more controlled by implementing organizations than convened by all of the actors who are involved in the scale of the problem, then we're probably not going to be able to have that kind of systemic change that we want to see. So we feel like it's critical to be able to influence how donors perceive scale as connected to really localization, the ability to get everyone who is part of the problem involved in the solution at the scale that is needed, and not just do these projects that don't necessarily lead to the kind of change that would help us to see global impact. I believe I'm getting close to time. I'm just going to check and see. So I'm going to move very quickly. The way that we're applying some of these lessons, the mindset shifts I mentioned, staff having the impression that scale initiatives need to be primarily privately funded. That's something that we've been able to start to shift, where we are seeing colleagues work through donor-funded projects in order to make incremental progress towards impact at scale. We've developed resources and guidance now that are helping with process level, not how do you achieve scale in a particular area. Also having that Vision 2030 strategy. Measuring collective impact and systems change is becoming something that we're better able to do now. And then also having a variety of ways to achieve scale, and understanding that we have to work in flexible ways to achieve those. I'm rushing a little bit because I want to make sure we have time for my colleague Sanella, who's got a really specific and clear example of how did we change our way of being from a project-focused organization to thinking, acting, and working differently, and the kind of impact it's been able to have, not just in one country, but elsewhere. Thank you so much, Sanella, for sharing your experience with us, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Actually, good day, everyone. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share with you my story and insight into how CRS Bosnia and Herzegovina successfully catalyzed the impact of the scale of the social housing model, working in partnership with the government, but also with our partners, different NGOs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. First of all, I really would like to welcome you to the Bosnia and Herzegovina. Why I'm doing this? Because many times I travel, and when I said that I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina, people said, "Oh, this is about war." That's why I wanted to show you very quickly how my country is nice, what is the beauty, and also the history of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Why I'm doing this? Because in the coming moment, actually, I will introduce you with the context in which we worked in the period from 1995 to 2007. Can we get the next slide, please? Yeah. Actually, I would like to introduce you with the context in which we worked in period from 1995 to 2007, and what actually motivated us to change our approach, to move away from the recovery process to the humanitarian actions toward development programs. After the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we had more than 50% population. Actually, 2 million people have been displaced persons. Also, 40% of housing stock was completely destroyed or partly destroyed. People could not return to their homes. They were mostly living in collective centers and alternative accommodations, which were poorly conditioned facilities. Very often, several families lived together, sharing even basic sanitation space. In 2007, when we started social housing in Bosnia and Herzegovina, approximately 20,000 people lived in more than 130 collective centers, and it was 12 years after the end of the war. Without proper law legislation, our government could not find solution for the people living in collective centers. Also, our government, during immediately after the war, they finished the privatization process of the housing stock, which means that municipality and government completely stood without housing stock, which could be used for the accommodation of the displaced families. Because of all of that, our government was not capable to access the external funding for public housing solutions. how our journey looks like, actually. You can see from this slide that this is a process that we started from 2007, and we are now in 2025, and this is a live process. As Erin said in her presentation, catalyzing the impact of the scale, it's really and truly a process that takes time. I know that we started at the beginning with a very clear vision, why we need the social housing and how it can help our government to support and resolve a very important problem from them. That's been providing adequate and permanent housing solutions for displaced persons. But we could not imagine that we would reach today's results. Also, it was even now, it is a joint journey with relevant ministries for displaced persons and refugees in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is the only way how we could catalyze. That is my opinion, honestly. This process, on a slide that you can see, we actually divided on 3 phases. First phase for us, it was mostly exploring and piloting through the direct implementation, and also doing on institutionalization of the social housing in Bosnia and Herzegovina. After that, we went into the second phase, which is moving to the technical support to the government towards the closeout phase, in which we are catalyzing our outcome of the scale through provision of the technical support to the government. What kind of, usually, actually, we all present our results at the end of the presentation. In this time, I really purposely decided to talk about our results at the beginning of this presentation, because it will be easy to understand me actually how we did it and who were involved to get to these results. Actually, what we succeeded until today, we managed to replicate the social housing Bosnia model to the other countries like Serbia, Montenegro, and you will talk also, I will mention a little bit Armenia. We also successfully worked with the government and established entire legislation system on 4-level government structure and secured institutionalization of the process for the management and maintenance, which means sustainability of the social housing model. We also worked on a pilot project, which we started with the pilot project. It was totally, we built 290 units for 290 families in 10 municipalities. However, with additional support and fundraising, and additional support of $60 million from Council of the European Bank, our country was able to expand the social housing stock today on 3,500 families, which means that we now more than 10,000 people living in social housing buildings in 45 municipalities. Also, that means that we closed successfully 105 collective centers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is not the end, actually. Our government also provided resources to expand support to the total of 5,000 families by 2027 and fulfill their goal, I hope, to actually close all collective centers, actually what remains 25 collective centers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. These slides shows photos. These photos actually I wanted to share with you because talks about our tenants, talks about buildings, talks about our tenants from the perspective of different age, perspective of the social status, showing also with high quality technical solutions adapted to the needs of the people, to the needs of the community. Also, housing issues can be solved for the wider population, enhancing also development character of the community in general. That means this was very sensitive and very important, especially for the small communities which suffered during the war a lot with the damage. Entire process how started actually. As you know, we worked from 1995 in Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, we found it that we are not able to repair all the individual houses. That's why we needed to approach to completely different, I would say, a way. And first, we started with concept note. In that concept note, we actually showed what is the problem, what we want to achieve, and what we need to do. But also, very differently, comparing with standard concept notes, we talk about what we don't know and what Bosnia and Herzegovina doesn't have in order to establish social housing system. This was definitely learning. This was definitely learning phase for us. In that period, in that process, we seek for different solutions to find solutions for the government. To find the model of social housing, we didn't want to invent any kind of hot water. We just looked around of us in Europe, in the Balkan, and actually see what is efficient, what could be easily adapted to the Bosnia and Herzegovina society environment, but also resolve our problem, which is housing for displaced person. We found it very quickly. It was Vienna social housing model. We went there with the representative of government, relevant ministries from the Bosnia and Herzegovina to see the evidence, as Erin mentioned. Evidence is important. We used evidence base by organizing the visit there. Even during the visit, we saw what is good. We recognize what we can do, what could be applicable for us, and so on, which means that even during that 5 days visit, we almost worked together with the government and established the key principles of the social housing, which clearly showed us that we will not work on the project. It showed us that we need to work to create the system of social housing for the future generation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in that moment, I understand, okay, my God, I will become some kind of catalyst of the impact of the scale. We need to change the approach, how to do it. Taking all these principles into account and knowledge to the Bosnia and Herzegovina context, together with the government, we decided that we will pilot the project. To be, believe or not, even our government co-funded our pilot project, which was also very interesting because in that moment, government did not have a legislation. They counted completely on us that we will work it together. We tested through the pilot project different models important for the Bosnia and return rural, urban model, also with various ownership models through different public institutions and so on and so on. Also, in that time, we saw that important factor for the sustainability of the model is capacity building of the institutions, especially municipalities. And we worked through the process with them to achieve that result. And one of the things which government really relied on us, it was a fundraising. That means we developed and worked with them on fundraising roadmap. Doing all of that, actually, our approach was really to work side by side with the government. Even we know it, that working with the government, it's a process that always takes longer and also it's more complicated. But for us, the results and what we wanted to achieve for the long term, that was the only recipe of the success. When we talk about direct implementation, which was implemented through the pilot phase, actually we can see it, and from this distance, I really see that this is a four sectors, 4 areas. Most important, of course, it was the partnership with the government. We worked together with the government to design the process, to implement jointly process, to adapt solutions. When I said what jointly for me and for CRS in that moment was that CRS has to be flexible to find the best solution to adapt program to the response on the long terms of the community needs and to properly communicate all of that with donors to get their support, because it was also part of our advocacy and building the trustful relationship with the government. That, as I said, really reacted with a trustful and transparent partnership and strong state ownership and clear understanding of long-term impact for the future scaling. Changing the mindset, Erin already mentioned that. And to be honest, changing the mindset through direct implementation started first with changing the mindset of CRS, as well changing the mindset of me personally as someone who worked in CRS. From the perspective of changing the mindset for the CRS means that we have to actually give up from the original idea. We will support returnees and repair their individual houses to go to the something what will be much more meaningful for the return process for the government and have long-term let's say, effects on development of the government and environment in Bosnia and Herzegovina. For me personally, as young engineer who start to work in CRS, I also worked in an environment. Okay, this we need to provide housing, individual houses, and I bring set of skills to do that. As I said, when we understand that this is not a project, this is a program, this is a building the system, then I found myself, oh my God, what kind of skills I need to learn. And honestly, I go through the entire process in order to become a leader of the Catalyst, how to become the leader of the team who will be able to successfully catalyze the impact of the scale. Parallel doing both things, we also work with the donor a lot. Working with the donor means that we constantly, because this was a new for the Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we need to change also the mindset of the donors somehow, even to educate them to that. We constantly keep them around us. We constantly inform them, and to be honest with you, we use a lot of government to actually go together and together advocate, because it was also very powerful, I would say, tool for the donor. Leveraging media. Leveraging media is essential. It was actually essential in our work. You see the photo actually on the screen, and this was this photo presents the building works of our first social housing model in Bosnia and Herzegovina. When we had the opening ceremony, there is so many media were there, because government also together with donors invested in this. And I was very curious to see how they will report it on the evening actually news. And I listened, and I see that, okay, they reported, but they didn't report really correctly what was our vision, what we wanted to achieve. Then we understand that we need to work also with the media, to educate media, to make to become partner of the media, to do advocacy about social housing, because it was in that period a sensitive topic in Bosnia and Herzegovina. How we work on scaling, actually. This is something what come completely, I would say, naturally to us because of our because of our work side by side with the government. Actually, during our direct phase, which we do, we worked a lot on building capacity and transfer knowledge and on the municipalities and NGO sectors, which actually become the right hand of the ministry in managing and maintaining the social housing, as well case management of the tenancies. However, very important factor for our government in particular and for the transitioning was the fundraising. CRS really closely work with the government to help them to prepare project proposals, to advocate for the new funding. Also, we from one side, we were actually the guarantee for our government that they will be able, through our technical support, to successfully implement the project. And also government, and for us it was very important that they can use CRS influence and name and knowledge in order to secure funding. From the donor perspective, they also liked to have a CRS, actually this partnership, government and NGO sector with technical capacity, because again, it was for them guarantee that government will succeed in implementation of these funds. No, of course, we cannot avoid creating the relationship, especially facilitating and nurturing relationship. It was always crucial for a work of our NGO sector, especially if we want to catalyze the scale and advocate and transfer the knowledge and experience within our work. This is all about Bosnia. However, I'm really happy to report you that actually we transfer our scale, our knowledge into the Armenia. And maybe some of you will ask how we come to Armenia from Bosnia and Herzegovina to Armenia. It was very simple. Most of you know that, and we also follow the escalation of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, and how many people, almost 120,000 people from Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenian, came to the Armenia as refugees during the September and October 2023. And when we see that, we knew it, that we have a model, we have capacity to help them. We also do a quick assessment and see that actually Armenia as a government has the same problems and facing with the same problems as Bosnia and Herzegovina several years ago, which means that they need a housing. They don't have a housing stock because it's privatized. They cannot offer for the refugees. We also know that they have a very limited legislation and also almost none experience in implementation of the social housing. Without partners, without NGO partners, we couldn't do, I would say, nothing. That means we reached immediately our partner Caritas Armenia and Mission of Armenia in Armenia. We set the meeting with the government and we talk about how we were able to help them. With support, honestly, of our Cascade team and our platform, Homes and Communities, and I use this opportunity to thank them also, this time publicly. Actually, they helped us with the technical but also financial support to go through the startup phase. When we presented our idea, they said, "Oh my, that's good. We can do it. Let's start with startup phase." They helped us actually to do almost the similar things, actually to organize and bring government representative of government Armenia to the One Housing Forum in Poland to see that other governments also looking the problems, have problems of housing and looking for the solutions. And social housing is one of the good model. After that, with support of the Cascade, we organized exchange visits, which was almost the let's say star of that startup phase, that government to government learned, which means that government of Armenia representatives come to the Bosnia and Herzegovina. We show them actually what we achieved, what our government together with us achieved last 15 years. They were able to see the models. They were able to talk with the ministries, social workers, tenancies, domicile population about model. They were able to see what is good, what is less good, what they can adapt to the Armenia context, what they can do better. And to be honest with you, I will be even more happy to see how they improve the social housing comparing with the model of the Bosnia and Herzegovina. After this actually process, we signed the MOU with the government, and now we are in the process of implementing the project in Armenia. Again, Cascade and platform helped us actually to fundraise, to get the resources for the first pilot project in Armenia with the government, and also we successfully submitted the project proposal to the UNHCR for the $4 million for the social housing model. As I'm approaching to the end of presentation, I hope I was able to present you our excitement and our journey through the social housing and catalyzing the impact of the states. Like Bosnia and Herzegovina, I'm so convinced that other countries, seeking for the solutions. There is a million people in the world. We can see Gaza, we can see Ukraine. They will need different solutions for the housing. That means I believe that our government and also our country program have to strive to support government and NGOs in their efforts to address these needs. Thank you very much for your attention, and I am on your disposal for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for our panelists. I echo the comments in the chat that this has been an extremely interesting webinar, and it's been great to learn about your experience and also to hear and feel your excitement for this initiative. We have a few questions on the chat. Erin, the first one is addressed to you, since you alluded to the fact that skills, the capabilities, and the focus on scaling when you act as a catalyst are different from when you act as a project manager or as a doer, as you were describing. So could you share a little bit more about the lessons that Cascade has had for the larger CRS organization? What have been some of the biggest challenges in shifting this mindset and culture from this Cascade approach and integrating that into the overall organization?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because it's a critical one. So I can share a bit of internal challenges that we had, which I think are perfectly safe for this space. That's what we're trying to do here, is learn what does it take internally for organizations to embrace this. So I had showed you this conversation starter, the mindset shift document, and boy, did it start some conversations. one of the conversations was, wait, so you're saying we're just not going to be managing projects anymore? What does this mean for our direct work, for our mission? We are an organization that responds to emergency needs all over the world on a regular basis. So are you saying that that's going to stop? So one of the biggest challenges that we had is helping all of our colleagues to embrace the ambidextrous nature. We will be an emergency response organization. And while doing that, the way that Sanela just described, it really makes it clear. While doing that, we can earn the opportunity. Earn, because it's not a given that we have the reputation, that we have the relationships, the connections in every context to be even able to play the catalyst role that we would aspire to play whenever possible. So we want increasingly for our colleagues to understand that both our emergency response life-saving work is important and critical, and that while doing that, we can get to know the systems involved and the bigger changes that can be made so that impact can be felt at a much larger scale than what we can do with those emergency response projects. So really, like, embracing that ambidextrous nature is hard because we tend to think in black and white. Are we a doer? Are we a catalyst? And that was a challenge, I would say, for even a couple of years, even may still be, where some people say, well, that's not catalytic, we shouldn't do it. Well, it depends on the context. So that's a bit of a challenge of embracing that diversity. Another major challenge, I would say, frankly, is donor expectations. We have signed agreements with donors that are expecting us to deliver on specific targets and specific indicators. And it's not a problem to be held accountable for results. The challenge is when those results have to be measured in a donor specified way that is sometimes even in contradiction with the national indicators. So we've had examples for where, let's say we're working on a WASH project. I have had this experience myself, where we're trying to support the entire national system to better be able to deliver sanitation services, making sure that people have access to sanitation. And we want to make sure that the system that's in place in that country is able to continue this. We don't want our project to intervene and then we're not able to see the progress anymore. Well, in this case, the donor's indicator had a slightly different definition than the national indicator, which meant we needed to spend extra money of the project, setting up a parallel data collection system to be able to comply with that donor requirement. We're wasting that donor's money. And they know this because they realize that they're not able to adapt their definitions to the national system that already exists for collecting that data. So I would say donors, there's so many really specific things that we could get into, but there are many ways that this group can support those kinds of shifts to help donors understand how we could be more effective with resources by better understanding the systems that exist for contributing to impact.
That's very, very helpful, Erin. I have a follow-up question for you and the rest of the panelists. If you could delve a little bit more about what are some of the most successful strategies that you have used for translating the lessons and the learnings from Cascade into the broader organization. So we've talked a little bit about the challenges, but what have you seen working in this translation from Cascade to the broader organization? I'm guessing a lot of people present here are thinking about these mainstreaming aspects. So what would you recommend as good lessons to integrate this new thinking into the larger organization?
I'll get it started and then I'll hand it over to Sanela, who's been doing this in a very specific context. I mean, for looking broadly at the whole organization, what has been the very most helpful is to be able to have specific and concrete examples. Being able to tell this in a way like what Sanela just did that makes sense for those who are on the ground, those practitioners. Having guidance where we've quabbled over every single word and gotten very specific about language, and we think that it's very clever and using all this systems language. In the end, I'm not convinced that that kind of generic guidance is the most effective. I think understanding through a lived example, like these case studies, being able to tell the story and understand what change actually looks like from the perspective of a manager of an initiative, the way Sanella just did, that is so much more powerful than kind of than other approaches, and then mainstreaming it through in a way that feels part of the job and not a separate initiative. This is the way we work. It's not a different thing we do. And I think those are some kind of principles that can help to guide us as we shift the way that we're trying to work.
Yes, Len, go ahead, Len.
Yeah, but maybe I can jump in here and reinforce the point that Erin was making. I think we also need to kind of unpack what we mean by mainstreaming. If by mainstreaming we're referring to quote unquote headquarters, that's not the way that CRS approaches mainstreaming. Yes, we worked with strategic change platforms, and we did mention that in the presentation. Sanella also acknowledged the role that the strategic change platform on homes and communities, the role that they played in helping them catalyze scale. Strategic change platforms they exist at a global level, but if we really want to mainstream the role of being a catalyst for scale, what we really need to do, and this is what we're doing now, is reaching out to regions and countries, but especially countries, which is why we have Sanella on the panel, because it's at the country level where the impact happens. And it's at the country level where we need to go for scale. And it's at the country level, and actually at all levels, that we need to start shifting our role and balancing it with being a direct implementer, but also being a catalyst for not just scale, but sustainable solutions that are relative to the problems that we're facing.
If I can just add, actually, we all I think that how we can catalyze the scale among all of us that are working in CRS and our partners is actually to learn from our examples. And though this is great opportunities that we can share how we are doing. How others can adapt it. For me, it was interesting to participate, for example, and support CRS Lebanon when they talk about housing and how these social housing solutions could be adapted. That means it is really important that we learn from direct, programming, from direct examples, because then it is maybe most easiest and most adaptive way that people see the value and use that and decide to design for their country programs. Yeah.
This is very helpful, and I think working through examples is a great strategy, and that also helps in balancing this tension that sometimes exists between headquarters and country offices, and allowing for enough flexibility for them to respond while also being mindful of the broader objectives. From a strategic perspective, I've been interested in learning more about what led to the creation of Cascade. I'm guessing that it was one step before moving towards full organizational change. So what were the advantages of starting with scale and then moving towards larger change organization? And what do you see as the next steps for the Cascade initiative after the successes that we've been discussing?
I think Erin might be in a better position to respond to the genesis.
So at the introduction, I mentioned that we had, the confluence of two things, the agency strategy, which was calling on the whole organization to be more of a catalyst for impact, larger than our own direct programming. And at the same time, the opportunity presented by the foundation, GHR Foundation, that has invested in our institutional capacity and given us the flexibility to choose what institutional capacity do we think is going to be most important to keep us relevant into the future? And so based on that strategic focus on being a catalyst, we propose to them, what if we work on strengthening this institutional capacity to be able to be a catalyst for scale? We have examples throughout the world of where we've been able to have impact at a larger scale than our direct programming. And we want to learn from that, and we want to see how we could do that more consistently and have more of a consistent approach. And we are super grateful that they're able to invest in that. It's not a huge amount of resources. It's just a small core team, but what we have behind it are the resources that CRS is investing in our own strategy through a number of teams all over the world to focus on the same thing. So I think it would have been a shift that the agency would have been doing regardless of the GHR investment, and that GHR investment really helped to speed it up, because having a focused team that is able to collect this learning, listen, and be able to share it consistently across different teams, cross-check it with different sectors, different geographies, and really distill those learnings into something that can be put into action, that has been really valuable.
And maybe I can jump in, Carla, to give an overview of what the next steps are for Cascade. And it's really building on the first phase of the Cascade implementation. I think earlier, Erin mentioned that CRS is, continues to play, in fact, a big role in direct implementation. So project design and making sure that systems thinking and scale are integrated into the process by which we think through the design of a project is one big step that Cascade has taken. And it's also a very important step for mainstreaming, not just in terms of providing guidance or a checklist or this is a how-to guide, but really, if you're helping people think through their projects, you're actually helping them shift their mind also about and how to think of, these projects within a larger context, but also think of it within a systems perspective, because projects should add up to what we aim to achieve through systemic change. The other thing is, as I've already mentioned, we work at the global level through the strategic change platforms, but we're now really reaching out to regions and country programs to provide accompaniment or any form of support, whether that's strategy development or business development, but especially for strategy development, where we really want to make sure that we're embedding a systems lens into analyzing the context, supporting local actors within those systems that we're trying to change or improve, and then ensuring that through this combination, we are moving towards scale by working with others, convening different stakeholders. And, once you get into that mode, there are plenty of factors or, things within that context that are not within our control. So adaptive management is going to be very important as a competence for everyone, not just country program people, but all throughout the organization. So the emphasis on adaptive management and how adaptive management is supported by an appropriate meal system, that's also an important next step for us. And then finally, just perhaps spotlighting the whole, I guess, a thread that's running through the presentations. We have to continue to learn. We have to be able to always, draw lessons from actual experiences, see what's working, what could be working better. Because especially now, the context is very unstable. So many things are in flux. And only by learning can we kind of, how do they say, ride this rapids or navigate this uncertain context that we're faced with. So those are the important next steps for us. Obviously, things are still unfolding And we ourselves in Cascade have to adapt to how things are changing, both institutionally, but also internally, and but also externally. But our main focus is to support at various levels, at the global level with SCPs, with the strategic change platforms, work with regions, but also establish supporting and encouraging and trusting relationships with country programs. Finally, and I just want to mention this because the donor element has already been mentioned. I think that is an important and undeniable challenge. We can go on and on about how we're trying to shift to being a catalyst for scale. But it's really important to acknowledge, and not just acknowledge, but to find solutions on how do we engage with donors, not just to fundraise for our own individual agencies, but collectively, this community of practice, how do we start engaging with donors so that we also help shift their mindsets and perhaps even collaborate with them on some innovative resourcing that will rechannel funds towards systems work or scale, and also for supporting local actors.
Thank you so much, Len, and really exciting to hear the future plans for Cascade, and hopefully we'll do another webinar in some time and share more lessons and successes from your experience. And thank you also for sharing your reflections around donors, which is getting a lot of interest in the chat. And I believe, Erin, you have some experience to share from Latin America. So if you could delve a little bit more about what your experience has been in dealing with donors now from more like a catalyst perspective than a project-based organization.
Yeah, I liked Kate's question about resource mobilization, and I kind of wanted to answer from a slightly different angle of mobilizing resources. Yes. We've had some really impressive success long before I joined the Latin American region from our peace building team. They have been working in this way for quite a while. And by what I mean by this way is they work through coalitions, trying to inspire others to affect change at a much larger scale. We really don't have a lot of funding for peace building, for social cohesion. That's just not something that institutional donors want to fund, sadly, but we've committed private resources to a core team of people who continue to work on this through coalitions of church partners, through governments of countries we don't even have a physical presence in. They've been able to inspire women so much with their change that those women are institutionalizing change within the government within which they work, within the church institutions that they belong to. And there have been some really impressive ways that we've leveraged the resources that others have that they can bring to bear on a problem at the scale of the need because of our work with them. Now, those resources are not coming to CRS, but they are coming to the problem that needs to be addressed. And that's, it requires a really different way of working, and that does require some level of private investment from CRS, which is absolutely a luxury that we're able to do that. But the results that we see there are just mind-blowing, frankly. Results in countries where we have absolutely no physical presence and where the outreach of this dedicated core group has really created waves. So that's something, that goes beyond the kind of traditional resource mobilization that we think about. We've also been able to bring to bear and leverage other resources. An example, that's similar to the example that Sanella shared actually leverages millions of dollars in resources that went to the housing problem. It did not go to CRS, but it came to the problem. And so that's the kind of, when we're able to work with all of the various systems that care and that need to resolve this problem, we can unlock various resources. That does not necessarily get channeled through our organization's books, which it means that it is the challenge that remains is how to fund that sort of a facilitation role, the role of an intermediary where you're able to support others, bring people around the table, and find solutions that do unlock those resources. And so that does take flexible funding, which is hard to come by. Not a perfect answer to your question, but also build on the projects that we do have that may not have as catalytic of a vision, but that can help us make progress little by little. Change a school feeding policy through a very traditional project, which unlocks change for the whole country. You know, little moves like that can help us work with others in more catalytic ways.
Thank you, Erin. I think it's your perspective about broadening where resources can come from is a very good one. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to take a last question that delves a little bit deeper into this idea of mindset change. If you could share examples of tools and resources that can holistically strengthen teams' capacity in shifting their mindset from this more broader perspective around scaling. Maybe Sanila can share her experience working in country. What tools and resources did you find most helpful in changing your mindset towards mainstreaming scaling in your projects and the way you conceive scaling?
Yeah, thank you. Carl, actually, with social housing, we started even much longer and before the Cascade as a program actually become. That's mean the old tools that we use is actually something that we came as a result of our, let's say, growth and our recognition and us actually recognizing what are the needs, what we need to do. We worked a lot with the experts within a country, also as I said, with the government. We had a working group which we organized. We called it family of the social housing, from which we collectively learned and developed the tools. However, when Cascade actually comes, they helped us actually to strategize now, especially when we are moving and trying to when we catalyze the programs which are not implementing in a country where we exist, we are almost exporting into the other country. Then the tools that Cascade helped us how to define the meal, how to approach what are the key goals that we should include in our proposals actually and to work on in order to catalyze the scale, in order to institutionalize, and also to how to say to leave the path of the sustainability and transferring the knowledge and skills in our case, in the government, who are capable actually to reach the funds which Erin mentioned. In our case, government now taking the credits from the EU bank, from the Council of the European Bank, to take and work on social housing and serve it for different population in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's become development project. It's, and that's also something what I always like to emphasize, that when you work with the government, for them it's much easier to come with for the huger funds than for CRS and other organizations.
Thank you, Selena. And I think this relates to the point that Erin was mentioning, that part of the success is making sure that teams don't see this as something additional to their own work, but actually as the way they work. So I was wondering, Erin, if you could share a little bit more about how you have managed to establish that process, if there are tools, resources where this becomes more salient, to make sure that teams understand this as a new way of doing things instead of an additional way of doing their jobs.
Yeah, Lana had started to mention that right now we're in the process of updating first of all, we have a lot of guidance in CRS. And the biggest challenge we have is that not a lot of that guidance gets used. I'm just being honest. I mean, we have, and a lot of it is also on an open source website on crs.org. But it's not, the problem is we don't use that guidance, right? So we are in the process of updating our project design guidance. It's called ProPack. It's the guidance we've used for almost a couple of decades for project design, and we update it probably about every 5 years or so. That's in process right now. And the reason we decided to update the project design guidance, even though we see this as something that's more at the strategy level, is because of all the guidances that exist, that's the one that's more likely to be used, because when there's a proposal or an RFA or a funding opportunity, someone who needs guidance will pick that up. So we wanted to make sure that even as we're designing donor-funded projects, we're really thinking first about the minimum understanding of the system within which we're working that would allow us to build in milestones into even traditional projects that would help us earn that opportunity to play a more catalytic role even as we deliver on the results of this project. So that's one thing that we're working on right now, and that's taken a lot of time because we chose to test it first with country programs who are going through this so that we could see, okay, is this practical? You've been working on a scale initiative and you're now designing a project. Does this help you? Would you use it? We want to make sure that there's also sufficient accompaniment of those tools, because one of the reasons the tools don't get used is that there's nobody there championing it, saying, let me walk you through this. Let's do it as a team. Let's facilitate a session where we're going to think through this together. The tools themselves are not really the point. It's the process and the thinking that you go through with those tools. If you get the right people in the room talking through the context, learning from their rich knowledge of the system that they're working in, then you can get a lot more practical insights on what would help us accelerate change and how we would be able to have greater impact than the scale of our particular project. So those are tools that we're building into the project design process. We're also supporting teams as they consider their new strategies. If they're looking at a new country strategy, we have a CRS colleague who's on the call who talked about country strategies. We've supported, we have regional offices. I worked with one of our regions a couple of years ago to support them with their regional strategy, and that trickles down to how the countries are working, what they're focused on, and we can already see the impact. We have a colleague from Pakistan on this call who has a beautiful story of the impact that they've been able to contribute to at a huge scale, and something that I remember 2 years ago was just an imagination of something we were kind of thinking through. So just building it into existing strategic planning processes, prioritizing, keeping it part of the conversation always. These are just some of the, it's not a tool, but a process that helps keep it top of mind and help colleagues to know this truly is a continuous priority. It's not a phase, it's not a fad.
Thank you so much, Erin. And to wrap up, I would like to ask our panelists if they could maybe share 1 or 2 recommendations for our colleagues online that are also interested in mainstreaming scaling into their own organizations. Len, maybe we can start with you.
Sure, thank you. I mean, it's hard to summarize it, but if there's one thing that perhaps I'd like to end with, don't be afraid of the idea of scale. Lean into it and make it really a journey of learning lessons from experience, and use that experience, use those lessons to keep refining the model and the approach.
Erin?
I would say be consistent, stick with it. Make sure this is a long-term priority for your whole organization, and keep up that consistency throughout various levels of leadership, from the most local to the highest level of hierarchy. That consistent focus and bringing it into every strategic conversation, into the way that you review proposals. Have you thought about how, if there's another system actor that could be doing this, that we could support? In every interaction, finding a way to build that into the thinking so that it becomes more of an expected way of being than a trend. And I think that we're on our way. We've got so much work to do, but we're really on our way to being an organization that supports one another and encourages one another to think more in this way, despite the challenges involved. Sanela?
Yeah, I would say actually from the programmatic side, First of all, as we concluded, catalyzing the scale required time. That means don't give up. That is the first thing. Be persistent and committed to do that. Then in your team, we need as a leader to build capacity of our staff to do the catalyzing. You need to recognize all talents which can easily adapt and learn and have that initiative to go through that process, to live that process, and also to build capacity of the team. We're all talking about catalyzing the scale, but I'm not sure that people in a country programs knows not what does it mean. We know what does it mean, but how to do it. And that how is really critical for us. I'm talking from the perspective of the country program people, and when let's say the old tools comes for people which implement, it's always like who will help them to do how. that's my, let's say, lens and recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Len, Erin, and Stanila. I think I speak on behalf of everyone in this webinar when I say this was extremely interesting and exciting. It's great to see what a small team that's dedicated and with a clear strategic purpose can achieve. And as you were mentioning, success is obviously the best recommendation, but when that success is built upon a solid learning strategy that allows for constant learning and adaptation, it becomes even more important. And I think keeping an eye out of how our lessons can be integrated across the organization in the strategy, but also at a more basic level in processes, tools, resources, is also key for success. So thank you again for sharing your experience. Thank you to all the people who joined today's webinar. I hope to see you all very soon in another webinar for the Mainstreaming Working Group. Have a great day, everyone.